We don't have to take what nature has given us. We can actually engineer plants and yeast to be more efficient, and that's the basis for a lot of the work that we're doing.
What we need to look at, though, is which of the pathways that come out of this are not only good financially, but those that are also good for sustainability. And this equation is really wide open.
We are in a race to develop fuels. The race isn't with other countries. The race is against time.
To meet the immediate and future demands, we made the energy solution spring from the ground.
Brazil is the most efficient ethanol producing country in the world. Sugarcane alcohol from Brazil can reduce the total carbon footprint by up to 70% compared with the gasoline.
The biggest challenge for fuel providers and car manufacturers is to reduce CO2 emissions over the next 20 years.
Demand for mobility will continue to grow. We believe that biofuels are very important because they help in an immediate way. All forms of fuel are going to be needed. Hydrocarbons, natural gas, biofuels, all of them are going to be part of the energy mix for the future of transportation.
Brazil has been very successful at taking a resource they had and finding the process to make that into ethanol. And people call those first-generation biofuels. We have lots of lab work around the world that are looking at the second generation. That's generally turning cellulosic material from, for example, weeds into biofuels. And the United States is very much at the forefront of the innovation part of the equation.
For centuries, we have been using yeast to consume glucose and produce wine and beer. We're trying to do something very similar, only we're engineering the yeast to consume that glucose and turn it into a fuel, drug, chemical. We call this synthetic biology. When I started in this area, my colleague said, "Oh, James, it's great work, but where's the application? What are you going to do with these tools? Who cares?" Malaria is an enormous problem. In any one year, 1 million or so people die of the disease, and most of them are children under the age of 5. So we thought this was a great opportunity to engineer yeast to produce an anti-malarial drug called artemisinin. This drug is derived from plants right now. It's too expensive for people in the developing world. So my laboratory engineered yeast to produce small quantities of artemisinin. Now that process is being scaled up and we'll have this drug in the market shortly, but at a substantially reduced cost. It turns out that anti-malarial drug is a hydrocarbon, and it's very similar in many ways to diesel fuel. We thought, gosh, we could turn our attention now to fuels. We could make a few changes in that microbe to turn it into a fuel-producing microbe. If we imagine that glucose is going to be our new petroleum, we need a source for that glucose. So the crops that we're looking at are crops like switchgrass. This is a native grass that grows without a lot of water and on marginal lands. We can turn it into energy farms. The challenge, though, is that unlike sugarcane, it's very difficult to get the sugar out of that biomass. So we use what we call a pretreatment process to extract the glucose from the plant, and then we feed that glucose to a yeast that we've engineered to produce hydrocarbons. And that yeast takes in the sugar, and it changes its composition and gives us this high-energy molecule. They float to the top, you skim them off, you put them in your tank. But it takes a lot of work to get from that small test tube all the way up into the million-gallon tank. So we have to given time, but I think that some of the discoveries that are happening might be applied by the end of the decade.
In terms of a sustainable equation for the planet, the role of biofuels is quite tricky. There are a variety of crops that do not compete directly with food, and finding ways to utilize those types of crops first, that's very attractive. So solving the science is part of the story, but then evaluating all of the new fuels in terms of the land use impacts that they could have, that is an even harder story than doing the good science.
Imagine that you could have one process that could take in sunlight and carbon dioxide and turn it into fuel. And imagine if that didn't involve growing anything at all.
The synthetic biologists are trying to take plants and make them do things that they wouldn't normally do. On the other hand, materials chemists like myself want to do artificial photosynthesis to improve on the process that nature does in real photosynthesis. We should follow the blueprint of plants converting sunlight into fuel, but take the approach that it could be much simpler. All we really need is a light absorber that absorbs sunlight. We also need a catalyst like iron or nickel. So when you see the hydrogen coming off of the photoactive material, that's an example of a semiconductor breaking the chemical bonds of water to make hydrogen and oxygen. Ultimately, our pieces are going to be contained in something that is easy to roll out of bubble wrap, or in would come sunlight and water. You would vent the oxygen to the air, but the bottom would leak out your liquid or gaseous fuel that then you could collect and use for cars and planes and storage. Our goal is within 2 years to have the first artificial photosynthesis solar fuels generator that we can hold in our hands, and then get to scale beyond that time.
We're certainly not good at predicting the future, but to me, electric vehicles look like a sustainable option. We've heard proposals about things as far-fetched as nuclear power planes, and even some proposals to raid around with light and air vehicles. And so, if the future in 2050 does include a fair amount of oil, what it means would be that we haven't deployed as many of these clean technologies as we already know are possible.
If you think about how long it's taken for us to build up the petroleum industry, we can't hope to reverse that overnight. It's huge change in our infrastructure. Yes, we should have been working on it 30 years ago. We didn't. We're trying to make up for that, and that means basic research needs to be done now and by as many people as possible. We have a long way to go, but I'm confident that we'll get there.
In the future, 3D maps are going to help people get places more efficiently.
As we just saw, the race to produce cleaner energy is charging ahead. In the meantime, demand for cars continues to climb. By 2050, it's predicted there'll be 2 billion cars on the planet, and fuel consumption will have tripled. To keep pace, we'll have to radically change the way we drive. Here's our next story, driven by design.
The automobile came around. In many ways, it was the future. We thought of it as one of the more positive changes that had happened to society. Suddenly, our ability to get a job changed. We can live farther away with bigger plots of land, with better quality of living. It all looked quite good. But there are limitations to swearing by the car. If it gets congested, your quality of life drops immediately. To spend so long in a car, it's very inefficient. Use of fuel consumption, things stop making sense all of a sudden. It doesn't bring you closer to where you want to get. It actually sometimes brings you farther.
The average American spends nearly 300 hours a year in their car, 38 of them stuck in traffic. Annually, congestion consumes over $1 billion in gasoline in the United States alone. The inefficiency caused by traffic, both financial and personal, is enormous. Dirk Sheehan and Carmen White's story is not that unusual today.
Dirk works an hour and a half away in Warrenville, Illinois. Generally, he wouldn't leave work until 6 or 6:30, and I would say usual time for him to get home is around 8.
Usually when I wake up, I'm the only one up. Sometimes the kids wake up with my routine. More often than not, I don't see them in the morning. I think about my commute when I wake up. I check the traffic report to see if there's any delays. The worst case scenario, it takes me 2 hours to get to work.
We are already so limited in the amount of time you can spend with the kids. And our expenses are crazy high. We are spending $400 a month on gas. It takes away from our food budget, and we never paid for gas like that before, ever.
If there's technology that would allow me to spend less time in the car, spend less money on gas, and spend more time at home, I'd be all for that.
The cost of traffic is